Your boss calls his penis Jumbo, and he's been known to whip it out in front of visitors. Not just visitors, but reporters. And he's even less shy about it in the bathroom. Anyone unlucky enough to be in the stalls when he goes to do his business will see his business. Outside the stalls, too. How would you respond if your boss stopped in the parking lot, in line of sight of the front door, and took a piss where everyone could see him? Or worse, what if you happened to be walking by and he grabbed your shoulder so he could use you to shield himself from the crowd? If your boss was the manager of Costco, the answer is easy: lawsuit. But what if your boss is the president of the United States? What then? What if it was your job to have your pant legs soaked in urine? Or what if it was your job to conduct interviews with him in the stalls while he did his morning glory? Lyndon B Johnson had an arrogant streak, but it worked for him. Between his folksy drawl, his goofy down-to-earth jokes, and his frat boy antics, he seemed to get away with a whole lot. He even called his penis Jumbo and showed it to anyone he could. It might have been because it was the 60s, 15 years before the term sexual harassment would even be coined. But it was still pretty damn weird, which is probably why so many biographers are keen to mention their personal encounters with Jumbo. Johnson would also drive into lakes with passengers screaming in the car next to him without telling them it was an amphibious vehicle. He was known to go cruising in the hills with a cooler full of beer and let the Secret Service just try to keep up. But Lyndon Johnson wasn't insane. He was arrogant, the winning kind of arrogant. Like Babe Ruth, LBJ called his shots long before he made them. When 20% of Americans thought Vice President Lyndon Johnson might have conspired to have JFK, his boss, assassinated. The press pointed out that Johnson had said from the very start his best shot at becoming president was over another president's dead body. And once he became president, he let it be known that he intended to beat Franklin D. Roosevelt's record for how much legislation he would pass, which was extremely arrogant to attempt. Except over the course of his presidency, LBJ would actually do it. The crazy old man waggling Jumbo at visitors, and the calculating statesman who won the presidency in the first place. These two men are not mutually exclusive, and they came bundled in one extremely arrogant package. Pardon the pun. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-duh on the internet and get to the facts.
If you've seen the show Naked and Afraid, you know what arrogance will get you if you can't back up that swagger with skill. One moment, you're telling the world you're ready to kick nature's ass. The next, you're crying on top of a nest of fire ants, begging the camera crew to take you home. On past episodes, we've covered how ego and narcissism can lose you everything, and how self-awareness and social conscientiousness aren't just squares to fill out your self-care bingo card. They actually earn you more money throughout your lifetime. Well, on today's episode, we're covering arrogance, a sin that's landed so many people first dates, it's almost an honorary virtue. And to expose arrogance, we've got 3 blustering myths to bust. Myth 1. Let's define arrogance, shall we? How is arrogance any different from ego or narcissism? Are they all the same? Myth 2. Arrogance and self-awareness can't exist in the same person, can they? The awkward, one-upper guy at the dinner party can't possibly know what he looks like from the outside. And it's not as if Lyndon Johnson planned to swagger his way into the winner's circle, did he? Myth 3. Finally, why do people find arrogance so attractive? And if arrogance is attractive, how can we use it to our advantage? Even better, how do we spot arrogance for what it is? Fake confidence. We'll get into these myths, but first, I want to talk to Joe about the infamous bunghole call and why LBJ recorded every single conversation he had.
Todd, do you remember a period of time where people were going around quoting the movie Anchorman, the Will Ferrell movie?
Yeah, one of my favorites. I've watched it about 700 times.
I think every guy friend I have, like they know like 10 quotes off the back of their mind, like just immediately.
Go back to your home on Whore Island, pops to mind.
My office smells of rich mahogany and leather or something like that. Yeah, there's so many good ones. But I think the real appeal of Anchorman, and please tell me if I'm wrong, it's that he's so unself-conscious or unself-aware and arrogant. That he's arrogant to a degree that we all wish we could be. Like it looks like confidence, but like so many times in that movie, he gets shot down by Veronica Corningstone, or like he gets stumped, or he gets told no, and he crumbles immediately. Like there's that scene where he's like in the phone booth crying, and he's like drinking a carton of milk. So it's like, that's arrogance. That's not confidence.
I think an example of that is the fight scene where they say they can't hit each other in the hair or the face.
Right. Yeah. No hitting in the face. So that's what we're talking about today. Hopefully, is we want to have the confidence that Anchorman has, but we don't want the arrogance. Or if we do, we want to take out the useful bits of it. And can we take out the part that everyone loves to quote, the things that people like to joke about is, what if you were so arrogant you couldn't lose, basically. To give us a real life version of that. And I'm not saying that LBJ was the real life version of Anchorman, but I would like to play you a call that makes it sure sound like it. Have you heard LBJ's infamous bunghole call?
I have not.
So, Todd and I went digging through history, and so nowadays it's pretty common for the White House to bug their own calls. In fact, if you ever, if somebody called you up and said, please hold for the president, you would stop and sort of clutch your stomach and take deep breaths, and you would talk to the president, but you would fully expect to be recorded, right?
Yeah, for safety reasons, security reasons.
Right.
Liability.
Back in the 60s, Nixon bugged his own calls, but that was different. LBJ was the first person to have a phone absolutely everywhere he went. He was like a teenage girl on the phone. Like he just had a phone everywhere, and he didn't have his phone bugged. What he did is he had it recorded on purpose, and he would point to his secretary basically and be like, "Start recording, please," or he would have a switch to do it.
He was like pre-paranoid.
Right.
He knew the value of this stuff before anybody else did.
Right, but he wasn't listening to his own recordings because he was like, the world will want to know what my pants measurements and bunghole looks like.
Let's see if you can't leave me about an inch from where the zipper ends, round under my back to my bunghole. All right then.
He was actually doing it because he really needed to hear his own voice. And the evidence of this, we'll get into this as we do the episode, hopefully. He would every night sit up in bed, and instead of reading the newspaper, he would sit up in bed and read his own conversations, just ad nauseum. Like he would have a transcript printed every day of him on the phone, and he would read through them. And then sometimes he would talk to his wife, and she would sort of like talk about his speeches with him.
During the statement, you were a little breathless, and there was too much looking down, and I think it was a little too fast. Not enough change of pace.
So that's the theory today. The theory today, hopefully, is that we can take what looks like strength and arrogance. We can take the pieces of confidence out of it, and we can hopefully use it. So we're gonna play the bunghole call for a second. So this is a call where LBJ calls his tailor, and this is the guy that makes his pants. And he starts talking about, almost as if the tailor himself has never heard what pants are. LBJ is like, here are the reasons why. Like, he calls the guy who makes the best pants in the country. Like the thing you should know about this call, he is calling the foremost like jeans or pants tailor in the free world. And he starts explaining how pants work and how they like ride up on him, and it's wild.
Hello. Now, the pockets, when you sit down in a chair, the knife and your money comes out, so I needed at least another inch in the pockets. Yeah. Now, another thing, the crotch down where your nuts hang is always a little too tight. So when you make them up, give me an inch that I can let out there, because they cut me. They're just like riding a wire fence. These are the best that I've had anywhere in the United States. But when I gain a little weight, they cut me under there. So leave me, you never do have much margin there. Let's see if you can't leave me about an inch from where the zipper ends, round under my, back to my bunghole. All right, then. So I can let it out there if I need to. Now, be sure you got the best zippers in them. These are good that I have. And if you get those to me, I would sure be grateful. Where would you like to send, please? White House.
Okay, so there's a lot to love about that recording. If it seems like we are kind of poking fun at an old man in his retirement during a very personal call of his, that is not the way to look at this. He has a team of people listening to this. He knows he's recording it. He signaled for it to be recorded. He is reading this later at night, like when he is sitting down thinking about this. And if you listen to his public speeches and the things he has said at Congress, this man is extraordinarily measured. And as his biographer stated, he is a calculating man. So this sounds crazy. He's talking about, he sits down, he's describing to a tailor that it's like riding a wire fence wearing the best pants in the country.
Well, there's a couple of things that came off to me, kind of manipulative, because he kept complimenting this tailor on his work to get him to go a little further, to get a little more out of him. And then I think a threatening thing that he worked in there was, I have knives that fall out of my pockets when I sit down.
Right. Yeah, the only thing I carry is $100 bills and sharp knives. Yeah, there's so much here. I mean, like, this is going to sound crazy in conspiracy theory. I think even like the corny jokes he tells, the belching, like, I think it is all calculated. Now, it doesn't have to be all of it. It can be that somebody, as we know in public speaking, you let some of your own personality out. Like you measure how much of you is going to shine through that paper you're holding up to the light when you give a public speech. So I wonder how much of this is LBJ I mean, like, there's a reason he is ad nauseum reading his own conversations back to him. I mean, if you're the president, like, say, Todd gets elected, we all voted for him, and you start reading back your conversations at night, you're probably going to focus on, like, when you talked with embassy leaders and when you talked with other presidents of other nations and, like, it's ambassadors.
More important things than your clothes.
Right, but LBJ is reading when he's on the phone with his tailor and his barber, and he's reading back conversations where he talked about his bunghole to his tailor, whereas, you and I would be reading back when we had a conversation with, the leading scientist for the CDC for this month. I think that is, we'll get into the theories of why, but I think that is calculated on LBJ's part.
In two parts, and as we go through the history parts of it, part of it is he's definitely a bit of a control freak, but he's so controlling that he's very detailed. And that's what you're going to notice, that he literally has his fingers on the pulse of the whole White House and the whole world.
Yes. When we start the episode and I foolishly compare LBJ to Anchorman, part of the reason I do that is because Will Ferrell, a very intelligent comedic actor, invented that character to connect with people who enjoy arrogance or think it's funny or charming. There's a reason everybody quotes Anchorman. There's a reason why LBJ designed this part of his personality to connect with the common man. And we really want to get into that today. That is today's whole episode, is how do we take that little piece, that magic, whatever they found, whatever they managed to tease out of the American psyche, and figure out why arrogance works so well. We want to know too. So I'm gonna actually pass this over to Todd, because I am dangerously close to just wildly conspiracy theorizing and not backing up a single bit of it. So Todd, could you bail me out of my very quickly sinking dinghy? Could you tell us why LBJ was so good?
Yeah, for not having an opinion on everything, right, Joe?
Right. Well, I've got lots of opinions. It's your job to back me up.
Well, LBJ was a very interesting man. He spent his whole life into his 60s working on his public image. He made himself look like you're saying, the Anchorman, just harmless, like a clown. But he had a pure and defined goal when he got into the White House, was he wanted to best FDR for the most legislation passed of any sitting president. Now, let's keep in mind that FDR had 3 terms. He was the only 3-term president.
Right.
And LBJ only had 3 years to do it because he got him because of the assassination.
Okay. And FDR, I mean, I was about to say up till now, but generally, if you don't look at Johnson, he is the top, quote-unquote, scoring president. If we're looking at it like sports, he hit the backboard the most times with legislation passed.
Well, yeah, and FDR, who's one of our favorites, right? Him and Abe Lincoln, during a world war would probably have a lot more buttons to push.
Right.
The Johnson administration submitted 87 bills, and Johnson signed 84. So he was on 96% of them. So that's congressional history.
Holy shit. Compare that today to the nonpartisan, nothing gets passed, lockdown system we have now.
Now, I want to tell you about some of the weird, crazy shit he did. Now, this was all premeditated, Joe. This was all acted out. This was pre-planned. We think with him and his wife, right, in cahoots.
Right.
Do you think he had any other staff people involved in this?
I would so dearly love to know that, because when he talks to anyone else on these recordings, it sounds like it's buffoonery, like we're listening to Homer Simpson. But then when he talks to his wife, it's all calculated. I'd love it if he had, like, I mean, we talked about how FDR had a journalist he confided in, who basically coached him his whole career. I want to know, I mean, I'm sure if I picked up a book once in a while, I'd know who Johnson's coach was, besides his wife.
Johnson was a real-life bully. He just had crass behavior. Now remember, Joe, Lyndon Johnson was a big man, 210 pounds, 6 foot 3 inches tall, and he used that size to intimidate everybody he could. It wasn't uncommon to see him swearing at somebody, spitting on or down on somebody, getting down low and laughing in their faces. He once pissed all over a Secret Serviceman who was shielding him from public view. Those are the guys that take bullets for you, Joe.
Right.
Now, when the Secret Serviceman turned around and was horrified, Johnson said, quote, "That's all right, son. It's my prerogative." But he loved, his favorite thing was to shock people. And he loved to drag them in the bathroom and speak to them, have conversations with them while he went to the bathroom.
That is, if you are doing that as a power play, I've seen bosses do weird stuff like this. Am I wrong in interpreting that this is like, that's to show you how little he thinks of whatever you need to do next? Like whatever you're reporting on, whatever your paperwork you're working on, that is a CEO move of, run this past me during lunch and I'll pay half attention to you.
Another weird thing, he was just real quirky. He made his chair in the White House, his Oval Office chair, was a helicopter seat. He even built an ashtray in it. He loved helicopters. He had a fetish for them. It was just real life. It was a real helicopter thing. It even doubled as a flotation device. No joke.
Just in case the Oval Office floods, right?
Exactly.
So the first part we want to find out is what's working for LBJ. We're talking all of his craziness, but honestly, people really did like him. He was super charismatic. People reacted to him. The nation loved him, or at least part of it. I think he had something going for him that you have going for you, Todd.
Please indulge me. I feel a compliment coming on. I can take it. Go ahead.
Well, it's a compliment, but I got it from a book, so I hope that doesn't lessen the ego stroke. Have you ever heard of the book The Charisma Myth?
No.
It's a really good book, and it's all about it's the Bible for how to be more charismatic and what works on sort of a primitive level. A lot of their research, that's it. If you want to know how to get me with a self-help book, hand me something that has a lot of interesting research in it. But they have a lot of like cool studies, and they break down what is charismatic, what do people react to. One part that I found very interesting is to be more charismatic, project power and warmth at the same time. So power meaning, on a personal level, if we're talking like original caveman days, like primitive man, that would be physical power. Somebody who is, projects physical power or projects the ability to sort of like sway the group. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, just strength. It can also be social power. So if you can walk into a room and get people to be excited for something, that's personal power too.
Yeah, I know what you mean. We think of that CEO where they come in the room, we all hush up because we're afraid if they look at us or if we make any noise, we'll get fired.
Right. So whatever power you wield, couple that with warmth. And what I mean by that is like personality warmth. Be, kind to people, be helpful, listen, basically all the stuff we've talked about on previous episodes. And when I say that Todd does this, I mean like both he's able to go into a room and get people to be excited and listen to an idea, but he also projects warmth on a personal level. And I also want to look at how LBJ does this. Lyndon B Johnson, We talked about him giving people the Johnson treatment, how he was, Todd just mentioned that he was this big guy. I mean, he's physically imposing. He's 6'3", he's 210 pounds. He's belching and talking about his bunghole and how his, knives and money are falling out. But he's also telling jokes, and he's charismatic. There's this anecdote where he's in Vietnam, and he knows that the presidency is awesome. Every other president before him is like, it's an honor, it's a duty, I serve the people. Johnson once said when one of the soldiers in Vietnam asked him, "Sir, which helicopter are you taking?" And he points to a field of choppers. And LBJ responds with, "Son, they're all my helicopter."
Yeah. Because at least he's being honest about the power of a president.
Right, exactly.
You want to be the most powerful man or woman in the free world, you can just come out and say it.
Right. So this is the important part about arrogance, is if you couple arrogance with power and warmth, it really feels like confidence. It really comes off as, swagger, but with charisma. And that is a potent cocktail. You may be surprised, as I was, to find out there is not a lot of research about arrogance.
Yeah, that would seem to be one, because it's so unattractive, and then, they call it confidence and arrogance are kind of blended together at times. You'd think there'd be 15,000 books written about it.
Right. Or like ego. Like we did episodes on ego, and we've done episodes on narcissism. There's so many studies about both of those. So the studies we do have about arrogance, they're mostly about classification and identifying arrogance. I think, and this is just a me theory, I think it's because when arrogance becomes narcissism or ego, then it becomes dangerous. So I think arrogance on its own gets ignored mostly because it's fairly harmless until it crosses the line into narcissism or something more dangerous.
Yeah, you kind of think of arrogance as being somebody who's a high school jock who it's going to wear off when they get older. I think the books on ego and arrogance, people don't see that in themselves. They're bad, self-perception of themselves. They buy those books and think, oh, I'm going to give this to somebody at work. I'm going to give this to someone in my family. They need to read this. I'm fine.
Right. And wouldn't you love to be the person who's receiving that book? Like, oh, a book on arrogance. No way this applies to me. I would do it in a gift basket. It would be like, here's your book about how to not be arrogant, and then just some fruit.
We're going to make a lot of them, and I've got a list of where we're going to go hand them out at.
Pass them out like those orange Bibles they used to pass out. So I did find one really good classification system. And the funny part is, again, when I say there aren't a lot of articles about or studies about arrogance, this isn't even a real identifier. It's not like they studied arrogance and found these categories. They're proposing this. So this is actually pretty new, cutting-edge stuff. We will drop in the links to it, by the way. This comes from the University of Missouri, Columbia. They took arrogance and they chunked it up into 3 pieces. So when you think your boss is acting arrogant, or if you're, no one's getting dragged into the bathroom to watch their boss take a Duke while he tells them that they're, reporting on the wrong things in Vietnam. Hopefully that's not happening to you. But you might see your boss or a friend or a family member or maybe yourself in one of these categories. And I just think what they have here set up is pretty good. First category is antagonistic arrogance. Now, if you imagine, and we will post this, a pyramid of arrogance to where, the very peak, it's the smaller percentage of people who do this, but it's the more dangerous and sort of the worst category of arrogance. So in the top, the peak of the pyramid, the worst category, antagonistic arrogance.
The bullies, the teasers.
Exactly. The bullies, the teasers, those who, in quotes, denigration of others based on an assumption of superiority.
And most of them aren't children. Most of them are adults.
Right. Yeah, this can happen at any age, but we're not talking about this is just schoolyard bullies. These are people who they are in real world positions of authority, and they think that makes them better than other people. I won't get super political, but if you look at like the comments made by the the Sackler family who ran Purdue Pharma, they sure sound like this. In this article, they say the antagonistically arrogant person shows or feels active opposition or hostility toward someone or something in their arrogance. So that's what we see in movies. When somebody shows like a villain twirling their mustache, if you've seen Shrek, Lord Farquaad falls into this category. So yeah, antagonistic arrogance. It almost sounds like it is for almost no reason. But remember, the reason why arrogance exists is because it masks lack of confidence, or it masquerades as confidence. So people who are antagonistically arrogant, the folks who are like, I'm better than other people, they're doing it because they need that in place of confidence. They need to spackle that hole where confidence should be with feeling like they are better than the next person. The next two categories on this pyramid, number 5 and 4, belief of assumption of superiority and failure to consider perspective of others, these fall under the heading of comparative arrogance. So if antagonistic arrogance is just saying I'm better than other people, competitive or comparative arrogance is like a tennis player who thinks they could give Venus Williams a run for their money, even though they have no shot, no chance. It's Ron Burgundy saying that he is the best jazz flute player in the world, or the best anchorman in the world. Competitive or comparative arrogance means that you are, and we've met these people, right? Like we've met the guy at the bar who's like, I could have beat up Bruce Lee.
I always tell a joke to the young men, the 25-year-old men in the gym and what I tell them is when an older guy comes up to you and says, well, you should have seen when I was your age. I was faster, stronger than you. I'm just older now. And I always tell them, don't pay them any mind. There's no proof of that. That's why they're saying it.
Right. Yeah, nobody's going to time travel to arm wrestle them.
And if it was true, they wouldn't even be talking about it. It wouldn't be a threat to them.
Right. So that one's fairly common. The most common, and also the most the least harmful and the most common, is just individual arrogance. And it says in this article, individual arrogance, this might be the most familiar type. It basically means that you think a lot of your own accomplishments. It's annoying, but it's mostly harmless. It's, somebody telling stories about their great plays in football back in high school. It's somebody talking about how well they did, at the bowling league. It's usually small time, but it's little brags. It's arrogance, but it's fairly harmless.
How do you feel about that when you meet somebody and they talk about that they won a spelling bee or they're the football champion? They're bringing in things that from 20, 30 years ago. Do you think they're trying to impress you because they want to be your friend, or how do you take that?
I take it one of two ways. They're either trying to impress me because they want to ingratiate themselves, or they are trying to manipulate me by letting me see that they're confident about something. But that's just it. It's what you said. It's if they are truly confident, they don't need to bring up the past. They will just show that they're knowledgeable or skilled at something.
I wanted to ask you about one more. The comparative arrogance one. We'll just rewind a bit.
Yeah, please.
There's a big one to failure to consider the perspectives of others. Me, I.
Right.
What do you do with people like that? How does that?
Ignore them. This is the one upper guy at the bar who is like, oh, you think that's good salsa? Have you ever been to, Tijuana? Like, it's the guy that, oh, the worst is computers. I hate that. Like, if you're at work and you're talking about like computers and you're like, and somebody comes up and they're like, do you want to hear about the system I built at home? And then they start telling you about their all the specs of what they built. And I'm just, yeah, it's hard to deal with. But the thing they're talking about is replacing something in their personality. So if they're missing like you said, rewind a bit. If they're missing the power element between power and warmth, the thing that actually gives us charisma, if they don't have the confidence in something, the power that they could physically best you, or that they could sway a room of people really well, or that they could actually take like a computer apart and put it back together, if they're missing the power element of that duo, they will replace it with just made up nonsense. They'll tell you about something they used to be good at, or that in a very specific circumstance, I would be powerful if we had this very specific scenario. So it's replacing that power plus warmth equals charisma combination.
Because the likelihood of all those stars lining up is less than 1%.
Right. That guy at the gym you're talking about, if we were back in time, if I was on protein at the time, if I was doing these exercises, if we were in a competition of this design, I would be amazing. It's like, well, okay, that's helpful in a very, very narrow sense. Now, from what I could tell from this neuroscience article, I don't think LBJ clearly lands in one of these types of arrogance, mostly because he used his physicality a lot. And if he did brag, it was usually about what he was currently doing. So it wasn't, something far in the past. And oftentimes what he would brag about is how he would manipulate congressmen. How like he would brag about how well he could work a room full of people. So I was wondering, how did he do it, and is it through this power plus warmth combination?
Lyndon Johnson was a world-class political chess player. He was a few moves ahead of everybody in the White House.
So by knowing everybody, do you have an example?
Oh yes. He had a dossier on everyone, especially every U.S. senator. This is a direct quote. He knew senators from eyeballs to assholes.
Is this like the Machiavellian thing where like he had dirt on all of them, or he just knew what they would be willing to pass?
I'm going to get into that a little bit later. But
Okay.
He didn't just, what he used to do was the senators are very powerful, so he needed them to vote certain ways. He intimidated with his tall frame other senators. He'd stand over them. It even had a name. It was called the Johnson treatment.
That sounds like he's torturing people, but he's just looming on them.
Johnson was once called out on using the treatment to intimidate people. Isn't this crazy this happened in the White House?
If you got called out on intimidating people and you're a politician, how bad does it have to be?
Well, yeah, and you're from a higher status class. You are a world leader yourself. Don't you think of the president bullying other countries? At the time, Vietnam, Russia, any of our enemies.
Imagine a president today giving like Kim Jong-il the Trump treatment or the Biden treatment. I'm still going with the conspiracy theory that all this stuff was totally intentional. So did Johnson know that he was giving people the Johnson treatment? Like somebody must have at some point been like, hey, you really seem to loom over these people right before they crumble to your will.
Well, that's a great point. See, this is how we know that it was premeditated. That he didn't do that to everybody. He learned the boundaries of the different senators. Some of them he flattered and buttered up. Others he pissed on, stood over, and gave them the Johnson treatment.
Okay, so there was premeditation.
100%. There's a quote, I'm going to quote this. It's out of the Portrait of a President by Robert Dallek. Johnson said, quote, "This treatment thing was nonsense perpetuated by intellectuals." Johnson complained that the picture of him performing back alley jobs, holding the guy by the collar, twisting his arm behind his back, dangling a carrot in front of his nose, and holding a club over his head. It's a pretty amazing sight when you think about it. Have to be some sort of acrobatic genius to carry it off. And the senator in question, well, he'd have to be pretty weak and pretty meek to be simply standing there like a paralyzed idiot. So he's already being demeaning. It sounds like he's done this before.
It sounds like he's been accused of this before. Like if I'm like, "Hey Todd, it really sounds like you know how to work a crowd and get them excited," and then you're just like, "Well, I'd have to be some sort of genius to do that, you know. They'd have to be ready for me to make them excited." Like it does not sound like this is the first time he's been accused of doing the Johnson treatment.
What this is, Joe, is he's basically congratulating himself for coming up with the treatment. He's writing this is ridiculous because he's bragging. But there's actually videos out there of him doing it. Now, quote, "Content in his powers of persuasion rested on his talent for debate and extensive preparation." And we want to get into all that, what it took to get that many people, to get that much information, that much intel on every person that worked in the White House.
Right. Now, if you do the Johnson treatment, or if I do the Johnson treatment on somebody, it's to get a raise or to intimidate somebody out of like making us pay at the museum when we've already donated money or whatever. Johnson is getting huge amounts of legislation passed. Like when we hear about, votes being locked, like senators not wanting to play ball with the other side, like Republicans and Democrats not working together. That's what he's doing. Like Johnson is looming over people and getting them to cooperate on a bill. That's so wild to me.
Well, just his preparation has to be respected. His public appearances, even the crazy shit, it was all cultivated. Now keep in mind, he recorded every phone call like it was a brand new call. Think of how many hours you'd have to work after work to do that, Joe.
Yeah, it's examining. Everyone has that moment where they look back at something that they're like a joke they should have said, or like you're in the middle of a fight with your significant other, and you're like, you walk away and you're like, damn it, I should have said, I had a quip there, I had a joke, I had a comeback. Do you want to listen to a bit of his wife giving him that advice, like them actually treating this like a second job?
So not only did he reread in every syllable, sentence, or word, his wife did too?
Yes, ma'am.
My critique, or would you rather wait till
Yes,
tonight?
ma'am. I'm willing now.
Yeah, so we listened to him be extraordinarily crass and belch and joke with his tailor, but yeah, they would go over his speeches. He would read his own day-to-day dialogue back to himself like he was studying it, and so would she.
Sounds like an evaluation for a Toastmaster speech.
It sounds exactly like that, actually. So 1 second, we'll play a bit of that.
Your looks were splendid. The close-ups were much better than the distance ones.
Well, you can't get them to do it.
Well, I would say this, there were more close-ups than there were distance ones. During the statement, you were a little breathless, and there was too much looking down, and I think it was a little too fast. Not enough change of pace. A drop in voice at the end of sentence. There was a considerable pickup in drama and interest when the questioning began.
So which parts of her doing that sounded like pre-prepared speech critique to you?
It sounded like a professional speech evaluator who's been doing this for years. The first thing that popped into my mind is how authoritative she was.
I'd say it was a good B+. How do you feel about it?
Yes.
In a time when it was a much more sexist time, she's like, sit down and listen. And you could tell that he was hanging on her every word. He wasn't cutting her off. He was even trying to plead with her a few times. Like, well, I can't control that. Like he was in trouble.
Right. And when she's talking about, she covers everything. Like she has taken debate and speech class. Like she's like, your eye
from
contact
his voice
is down.
to his looks.
The drama, like she mentioned that there was a lot more pickup in like drama when they got to the questions.
Read it with more emotion, this part.
Right.
Really emphasize this part.
So we go from the arrogant Johnson who is like talking about his bunghole and how his pants are riding up, and we go from Johnson saying that all the helicopters are his, and then we go to the craft. Like them taking his arrogance apart, taking his speech apart, taking his presentation to the public apart, and she is just deconstructing it like it's her job.
Another thing that's interesting about this Joe is he's the president of the United States. He has a whole party behind him. He could hire any academic, any journalist around the world to do this for him. But he trusts his wife because she's so good and because she's on his team 100%.
Right. I am so behind that. And when you mentioned, you're like, I wonder if he trusted anyone else. I do wonder that. I wonder if we look at other presidents, like we were just talking off mic about FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt. I am betting they had conversations like this.
And the first lady is probably more experienced and better than all of them combined.
Yes. Oh yeah, Lady Bird Johnson with her background. I'm betting she was better at this than Lyndon, and that's probably why he listened to her so well. I mean, like people who listen to that clip, he's very respectful. Like especially at the beginning, like he's like, "Yes, ma'am." Like he's all ears. We mentioned that Johnson believed his only way that he would become president is by having JFK die. So a lot of people believed Johnson was possibly involved in JFK's death, right?
A lot of people thought that. That was a very popular view at the time because Kennedy was a very popular president, and Lyndon B Johnson had said that out loud.
Yeah, to the press, and Oliver Stone came out with a movie, I think, that even like kind of suggested it. But Lyndon Johnson, like his major defense against that was just his public persona. How many recordings there were of him talking about his bunghole and ordering pants and like joking with people, going on joyrides. Like his defense against how he hadn't done something that malicious was almost quite literally his public appearance. So can we emulate that arrogance? Not to say that we want to seem harmless in how arrogant we are. We're not trying to become Ron Burgundy. But
we want the results. We want to win.
Right. We want the results, and we personally want to be able to spot the difference. Because we can't get the results without being able to identify what is actually arrogant. And now we come to the part of the podcast where I get to do a test. I love taking behavioral tests that we've read about from studies and applying them to torture Todd.
I was gonna say, why am I always a guinea pig on these?
Well, there's two of us in the room, lacking an actual guinea pig. The day you buy us one for the podcast, the official podcast guinea pig, we might transfer some of this nervous Joe energy onto it. This comes from the University of Queensland, Australia, and they made an arrogance test. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to read through names, and I would like you to shout it out when you're familiar with it. So I'm just going to go through this, and you tell me if you've heard of it or not. Just, if you saw it in the news or if it's in the back of your mind or something. Hydroponics.
No.
Never heard of it. Nuclear fusion.
Yes.
Okay. Photons.
Yes.
Satellites.
Yes.
Plates of parallax.
No.
Centripetal force.
No.
Plate tectonics.
No.
Particle accelerator.
No.
Okay. Atomic number.
Yes.
Alloy.
Yes.
Ultralipid.
No.
Manhattan Project.
Yes.
Okay. For everyone who is sitting in their car with their significant other and their husband just nodded along and said, I know every single one of these, they just failed the arrogance test. And Todd passed the arrogance test.
Because are those made up words?
Some of them are made up, yes.
Shit. I just thought it wasn't very well read.
No, you're fine. Ultralipids, plates of parallax. There's a couple in here. You can look up the study in our links if you'd like to know which ones were made up. Most of them are real. A couple of them are fully made up. And this is the test to see if you are overconfident or arrogant. And the arrogance part comes in the claim you make afterward. So over 5 experiments, Murphy and his colleagues investigated the pros and cons of confident demeanor. So they took this test. And they say in here, are you familiar with choline? We didn't use that one. Ultralipids, plates of parallax. Because those are totally fake concepts. People who claim familiarity with these are just being overconfident. They made the people who failed this test, who were arrogant, they made them make a dating profile. And then they took these dating profiles made by, statistically arrogant people, and they had the opposite sex look at these profiles. So they took people who had proven to be arrogant, made a dating profile, and then asked other people, they're like, hey, would you go out with this guy? What is your assumption? Do you think the arrogant people had more attractive or less attractive dating profiles?
I think they'd be less attractive.
I would think so too. Like, I would assume that at some point in there, they would start bragging about doing CrossFit. Like, they would stop talking about plates of parallax and made up words, and they'd be like, oh, by the way, I visit Cancun every other month. But no, it turns out that these people who were statistically arrogant, who had been proven to be arrogant, they were more attractive. Their dating profiles were seen as more attractive, more confident.
Even though it was ignorance?
Even though it was ignorance, yes. As long as it wasn't immediately obvious it was ignorance. We had an episode about attractiveness once in a dating profile, like it came from Dataclysm or one of the other studies we did on dating. And we found out that if somebody uses the word whom, WHOM, like as in, to whom would I send this letter? People who use the word whom, even if it's in the wrong context, got higher ratings. They were thought of as more smart.
Interesting. I keep thinking about the job interview and the person that brags during the job interview. They always get the second round, or they get the job, as opposed to somebody who doesn't feel comfortable bragging about themselves.
Right, exactly.
Or let's not just say bragging, exaggerating their skills, exaggerating their job time, exaggerating how great they were.
Right. I feel like dating and jobs can both be summarized. I think you're dead on. This study, the guy in the study, Murphy, they say the same thing. And Sean Murphy has a quote here that is fantastic. They said they found that overconfidence sets you apart from romantic competitors. If you appear confident, even arrogant, you simply throw off your rivals off their game. So I think jobs work the same way. It's not so much that you are being phony or that you are being falsely arrogant. It's just that you just stand a little bit taller than your competitors.
You're the little risky behavior, which makes you more attractive, right?
Right, exactly.
Maybe more chance for rewards in this relationship or this job.
Right. And I think the reason why is so many, if you're ever the guy that comes back from the bar and you're like, why did those arrogant assholes get a date and I didn't? Because if you have a massively inflated ego and you overwhelm your competitors, you're just simply going to win potentially because people of your same peer group didn't have the courage to get into the dating pool or get into the job pool, as it were, if we're talking about it.
Stage light is on you because no one else is willing to step up.
Right, exactly. Yeah, if you're the only one under the spotlight, then of course you're going to be the one they pick. If it makes you feel any better, by the way, they found out that on follow-up studies, the overconfident groups were actually seen as arrogant. And once the people looking at their dating profiles dug a little deeper, they were thought of as unappealing. So the arrogance got them the date. The arrogance lost them the attraction in the long run. So
it was just thin ice. They fell right through.
Exactly. It is thin ice. And that's kind of good news for people who are pompous and conceited. They might end up with a partner who's too good for them. And you can just blissfully assume your life worked out great because you're a beautiful genius. But if people figure you out, man, then it's pretty much over.
Just kind of set your watch to it.
Right. So we know for certain, you and I do, that it wasn't all bluster with LBJ. If we gave him this test, I mean, I like to assume because he is like the Homer Simpson of politicians that he would fail this test massively. But he actually did know what he was doing. So let's give him the benefit of our doubt, I think.
Well, one thing about Joe, I'll tell you, is he likes it when bad guys like this who treat people this way get it back in their face and they realize how wrong they were and get their comeuppance. You say that's true, Joe?
I would say definitely.
LBJ, he accomplished more. And you're absolutely right. You don't become vice president of the country, then president of the country by not knowing how to play the game. Not only did he pass more legislation than anyone, he also saved the Civil Rights Act.
Yeah, I limited my study to him being a looming monster and scaring the shit out of people. So he got a lot of public good passed, right?
He did. And we're not going to go over all 85, 90 of them. But the big ones, we took comment before, the Civil Rights Act, Medicare. He was essential to the passage of these. The Voting Rights Act and the Public Broadcasting Act.
Okay, so I'm not going to say all of the good things, but that's a whole heck of a lot of advocacy for the public and the public good.
And one thing I read throughout the history points was he had a process, Joe, that he used for all of his affairs. And this is what it was. He had a vision. He wanted to pass more legislation, and he wanted to create a legacy like no other president. So
Okay.
he had goals written down.
And we know from one of our prior episodes that if you write down your goals, you're like 10 times more likely to fulfill them. So already I'm on board with that.
He was also a master of details. And he would obsess who he needed on his side, who he needed to butter up, who he needed to flatter. And then he was clear about who he had to crush. Lyndon B Johnson was absolute master at mobilizing and motivating the right people. Now, probably his most defining element to the president's persuasion was the Johnson treatment itself. He was willing to humiliate. He was willing to push people right to the limit, for better or worse. He would threaten them, flatter them, or bully them.
So that kind of gives a little bit of a clear issue of why he was recording himself so much. Because if he's going to be doing this, like if he has to be able to reach out and touch people so much and so effectively, that kind of gives us a reason why he is listening to his own calls all the time.
Yeah, he had 72 phone lines installed for use. So these are all being recorded. And then he would listen to them over, and whoever was on it, what senator, congressman, whoever it was, world leader, he would dissect, I imagine with his wife, and find out what made each person tick. Their pressures, their values, their personality traits, and whatever they wanted to get out of this, what was in it for them. And he used that. And so this person-to-person approach, he didn't underestimate anybody. He used that for his own use to get what he wanted out of each and every one.
That is awesome. I'm not going to try to emulate that. You're not going to get a Johnson call from me where I record us, but that is still awesome. That's something we can work toward.
Now, my absolutely horrified favorite story about Lyndon B Johnson's president. When people told stories about the former president, John F. Kennedy's great female conquest, and it was talked about a lot. It made LBJ absolutely furious. He would slam his fist on his desk, and he would say this: "Why, I had more women by accident than he ever had on purpose." What a dickhead.
That is such a weird brag.
And they say it may have very well been true. Johnson was known to have on staff a lot of pretty young women from Texas in the White House. He even, Joe, had a wife-cheating buzzer installed underneath his desk, so the Secret Service men would warn him if his wife was on the way.
Okay, so that's something Clinton neglected.
If you've ever been on a date with someone who uses big words they're clearly unfamiliar with, or if you've worked under a boss who's convinced they know better than their team, don't worry. Arrogance only gets you so far in life. Once these self-deceivers are forced to put their skills on the table, the swagger will fall off them like a cracked coat of paint. But that's a trick to sorting the arrogant from the confident. You have to make them put up or shut up. Arrogant people depend on social politeness to not get called out. If you're the one calling them out, be prepared for a fight. One way to do this: square your shoulders, stand your ground, look them in the eye, and give them the full double-barrel discomfort of the Johnson treatment. Want to know how you can separate true confidence from arrogance really fast? Arrogant people assume they will win the person because it's them. Man, why wouldn't they win? Whereas truly confident people know it's their skills and preparation that will win in the end. LBJ knew the difference between confidence and arrogance. He knew that when he acted arrogant, it would be misperceived as confident. But LBJ also did his homework. He could back up that swagger. He put his skills on the table every single time, and it worked. LBJ set records in passing legislative changes, records that still stand today. Feel free to be arrogant once in a while. It looks attractive to the opposite sex, and it can inspire a following. But be damn sure you can back up that swagger with diligence and ability, or you might end up on the receiving end of the Johnson treatment by someone who actually did their homework. You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We also appreciate feedback, and we love it if you try to give us the Johnson treatment, so bring it.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.